Right, viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. What's happening in Madagascar? Madagascar's cornered president, Andry Rajoelina, is defying mounting pressure to resign, even as the country plunges deeper into political turmoil. In a rare live broadcast from an undisclosed location, Rajoelina stated that he is sheltering in a safe place after what he called attempts on his life and a planned coup. He claimed that a group of military officers and politicians plotted to assassinate him, forcing him into hiding. Widespread protests led by young activists known as Gen Z Mara have gripped the country for weeks. Demonstrators want Rajoelina to step down. His move to fire the entire cabinet failed to ease tensions. The powerful army unit CAPSAT has now declared control over the military, with some soldiers joining the protests as well. Opposition leaders insist that Rajoelina has already fled the country, a claim that he denies. Take a look at what he's had to say.
Efa niarahana hita fa ny krizy rehetra, ny fandimby sy ny tranga teto amin'ny firenena dia nitarika faharavana sy fiemorana fa dia nisy tokoa ny telo-dratsy hatramin'ny fahadimy amin'ny roapolo ny volana septambra teo anaovana ny fanonganam-panjakana ifofona ny aiko.
Joining us on the broadcast is Osanyan Taiwo, Policy and Strategic Implementation Expert from Abuja in Nigeria. Thank you so much for taking out time and speaking to us on NewsX World. We've been seeing Madagascar on the boil, and now President Andry Rajoelina has claimed that there's been an assassination plot against him, an attempt of a coup also occurring. Where do you see the situation in Madagascar heading to next, because it's been spiraling out of control over the last couple of weeks?
Thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. Firstly, I must sincerely and honestly feel so sorry for the people of Madagascar, considering what they are facing at this current political turmoil. It is one of the most difficult points in time that we face a lot of political crises where presidents lose faith in the populace, and then there's always this agitation coming up for citizens, creating a situation where they are requesting for presidents to resign. This cannot only be far-fetched from the fact that the citizens have been changed in the aim of affairs of the governance of their states, the countries. And this has been a replica in different parts of Africa, bringing in different revolutions that has actually metamorphosed and made Africa to decline from a democratic state to some state being controlled by the military dictatorship. Having said that template as an introduction, it is very important to state that the president of President Rajoelina has been a president that the people of Madagascar, realistically speaking, have not felt any sort of impact. When we look at the FDI, that's the foreign directive investment, when we look at development in the African region of Madagascar, when we also further look at other tenets that defines a developed country, we cannot say Madagascar is actually one country that we can push forward. However, is a method of trying to oustat the president, is it the best method? I don't think it's the best method. I think the people of Madagascar would actually sit down to realize how best and what best fit for them. And that is where the people would have to decide what is good for them. Impeachment might be impeachment fine. Are sitting in a constitutional manner, good, but not in that approach where his life is being threatened and he has to run for safe havens.
All right, sir, requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking further developments. A total of 165 organizations have now criticized South Africa for failing to make progress on debt sustainability issues during its presidency of the G20 grouping. The organizations have now urged South Africa to push for reforms before it hands over the presidency to the United States on the 1st of December. In a letter to South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, which was released on the first day of the annual International Monetary Fund and World Bank meetings in Washington, the groups have now called for the cancellation of all unsustainable and illegitimate debts to protect funds needed for education, health, gender equality and climate resilience. Remember viewers, the United States is due to assume the G20 presidency on the 1st of December, shortly after a leaders' summit to be attended by US Vice President J.D. Vance instead of Trump. This is the latest that we're tracking. We're learning that a total of 165 organizations have criticized South Africa for failing to make progress on debt sustainability issues during its presidency of the G20 grouping. The organizations have urged South Africa to push for reforms before it hands over the presidency to the United States on the 1st of December. There will be a summit of the G20 economies that is going to be held very, very soon. And United States, which is going to take over the presidency of the group of 20 nations, is going to be represented by US Vice President J.D. Vance instead of Donald Trump. Now, these 165 organizations have urged the G20 to push for radical reforms of debt restructuring processes. They've backed the creation of both an African credit rating agency and a borrowers club in order to facilitate cooperation among debtor countries and to push for an agreement to sell IMF gold reserves in order to set up a debt relief fund as well. They are already expressed that they are saddled with high debt levels and have faced additional burdens given US President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs that have impacted the global economy. The World Bank back in April had stated that half of some 150 developing countries are either unable to make debt service payments or are at risk of getting there. Meanwhile, these 165 organizations have come out and put out a letter and they've penned this letter to South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and have called for the cancellation of all unsustainable and illegitimate debts in order to protect funds needed for education, health, gender equality, climate resilience and overall development. With us on the broadcast is Osanyin Taiwo from Abuja in Nigeria. What do you make of these demands that are being put forth? There are some interesting statistics as well that have come to light. The total debt in emerging markets has risen by $3.4 trillion. This has been worsened because of the impact of Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs as well. What are the concerns that these organizations and that the African nations have at large with regards to high debt clauses and the clauses for relief as well that have been imposed by the IMF and World Bank?
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. So, firstly, we must understand that South African representation in the G20 chair, as a G20 chair, is actually sort of an handicap representation for the African region, because it is the only country that represents the African region in the G20. Now, I will set that template right. It's very important to state that the G20 global financial system, or the global financial system, still favors creditor nations. And without any reform, there is never going to be a common framework for debt treatment. Mm-hmm. Because these developed nations see Africa as a place to lead and transact for more funds to be brought into the African region. Mm-hmm. And then it's also a means that develops the region that I'm talking about, the global north versus the global south of Africa. In the real sense of it, there's only a limit that South Africa can actually plunge its own position into. Rather, what I actually suggest and propagate is that African nations, African leaders must sit together from the African Union to other sub-regional nations like SADC, that's South Africa Development Countries, mm-hmm. ECOWAS, and both of you must come together as a nation, as an African nation, to sit down and look for ways and approaches to increase their financial standings, whereby their own voice can be heard in the international system.
All right, with that, I would like to thank you for taking out time, sharing your perspective on these very crucial developments.